Police are investigating reports of anti-Semitic attacks in a number of Canadian neighborhoods. In Toronto, yellow Post-it notes with hand-drawn swastikas and anti-Semitic language were stuck on the doors at a condominium with many Jewish residents. A high school in East Vancouver was sprayed with graffiti portraying Hitler and the words, quote, "prepare to be gassed." Jewish groups say the justice system is reluctant to pursue allegations of hate crimes. But what does it take for a crime to be considered hate? Joining me now in studio to discuss is Tanya Walker, a lawyer from Walker Law. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with that question. What differentiates a crime from a hate crime?
A hate crime, you have to show motive. You have to show that what is going on in someone else's mind, that they committed this crime to the victim because they don't like the group that the victim belongs to. And it's very, very difficult to prove motive.
So, it takes me back to, because this idea to have this conversation started yesterday when we were chatting about, the Quebec mosque shooting and how that has not been labeled a hate crime. Meanwhile, the conversations that you may see around the dinner tables with families are going, wait a second, how is this not considered a hate crime? All signs point to. So what are the sort of parameters when it comes to labeling something hate?
Well, the parameters is that you have to demonstrate that the person had motive, and you have to look at the consequences. So the consequences of a hate crime are far less severe than, say, first-degree murder. So with a hate crime, trying to cause somebody to pass away, the maximum sentence is 5 years. With first-degree murder, it's 25 years, and you're not eligible for parole. And in 2011, the sentence was changed where you can't. So you have to serve each sentence consecutively. So 25 years times 6 murders, you're in prison for 150 years. You're not getting out. And you have a better chance of convicting someone where you don't have to prove motive.
Does that mean that we need to rethink this legislation? Perhaps changes are needed?
I believe changes are needed because, for instance, defamation. If someone says something about you that's not true, you can sue that person, and it's up to that person in common law countries, not the United States, to demonstrate, it wasn't defamatory, it was the truth. So it puts the burden on the accused to prove that they didn't do something wrong. Mm-hmm. In this situation, I believe that with a hate crime, because it's so difficult to prove motive, the accused should demonstrate it wasn't a hate crime.
So this is interesting. So you think that so the onus should be on the accused to say no and explain their thinking behind it, saying that I'm going to prove the opposite of what we sort of do in the court system right now, right?
Yes, because it's obvious to most of us, right? So if you
That's what it feels like.
Yes, if there's a temple and someone puts a swastika in a temple, right, to most of us, it's obvious that it's a hate crime. So why should it be up to the Crown to demonstrate motive? Why shouldn't it be up to the accused to demonstrate, no, it was just mischief, it was just assault?
So do you think at this point where we stand right now, it's more coming down to the charges and the length of sentence that can be tied into those charges, and that's why we're not seeing more hate crime labeling?
Yes, because when it comes down to sentencing, the criminal code says you can take into account the circumstances that around the crime. So around that time when you're thinking of sentencing someone, you can say, well, it was obviously, motive driven, and you can get a longer sentence.
And who decides this? Who decides if it's a hate crime?
The police that charge the person, the accused, decides if it's a hate crime, and the Crown that prosecutes will usually choose to prosecute a crime that you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt, which is very difficult to prove.
What about the victim in all of this? If they feel like it's been a hate crime, doesn't that have any weight?
Yes, at sentencing. So they get to speak at sentencing and describe how what happened made that person feel, and that will be taken into account at that time.
But not part of the process, not part of the investigation, not part of any of that?
No, because just because the victim felt that that was a motive doesn't necessarily mean that it was.
Oh, interesting. All right, yeah. Tanya Walker, great to have you here.
Okay, thank you.
This is a conversation, unfortunately, that will continue, and we'll see if the legislation changes with sort of the fabric that we're dealing with on Canadian soil at this point.